G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks of Ukraine War update for the 10th of April 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, and I'll continue to provide you with comprehensive news, political and social commentary from inside the manosphere. Today I bring you a comprehensive update on the Ukraine war for the 10th of April. Now, that is today here in Australia and slowly coming to an end in Ukraine. Now, there's an ongoing war of words around the conflict, but there's also the covert war. Now, today I'm going to speak about the covert war. Well, you've seen it. Sweden, possibly with the help of Norway, Denmark and others, all helped Ukraine blow up the Nord Stream, telling the Germans after the fact, I believe. That's why Merz was initially caught off guard and then suddenly pacified like a little baby crying in the corner, because everybody in Europe loves to beat up on Germany because it's the easiest thing in the world to do, because all of Europe created the crisis in Germany and the Marxists deliberately took Germany to the edge of revolution, and the counter-revolution swept into World War III, because all the other countries around them conspired. Russia conspired with Germany, America's conspired with Russia, France and Britain conspired with America, Poland was engaged in hostile actions against the Germans. Now, you may not may or may not believe it, but there were many known actions and newspaper articles openly calling for war as early as 1933. And right now we have the same problem with Ukraine. We have many calling openly for war. We have many people openly attacking the President of the United States for not wanting a war in Ukraine, saying that he's a Putin puppet. Of course, you all know the people who are insulting, smearing and belittling the American president are all cowards, because not one of them will go to war in Ukraine for Ukraine, because they can, quite now, renounce their US citizenship and go to Ukraine and be happily accepted into the Ukraine army, along with 50,000 other foreigners. Not all of... I am not saying all the supporters of Ukraine are cowards. Some of them generally do put their money where their mouth is. That's different. I'm talking about the people who spit vitriol day in, day out and do nothing but spit vitriol. Okay? None of them care about Ukraine. None of them knew Ukraine existed before 2022. Most of them ignored the 2014 to 2022 conflict in which Ukraine was engaged in ethnic cleansing, which is a war crime, but so is targeting civilians, which Ukraine has routinely done. But it's the covert war. The 27 highlighted activities under Biden, which led to the theft of Russian equipment, the firing of Russian military equipment illegally by... now, this is controversial, but a leading independence figure in one of the breakaway states of Ukraine is and has been named as the man responsible for firing a missile at, not once, it wasn't the first time either, but a civilian airliner. Now, that resulted in horrific deaths, which ultimately was blamed in Russia. But the thing is, this was an intelligence operation organised to create a war against Russia. And no one wants to address that issue or any other issue out there, because they all want to just blame Russia like they blamed everything on Germany, even when it wasn't Germany, right? For the last 75 years or more, Germany, actually all the way back to 1908, Germany has been punching bag for the British Empire, because always punching down, always trying to stop any country, particularly when industrialization began. Of course, British trade unions sabotaged the French. This is actually where the word sabotage comes from. It was actually the Vietnamese workers in France who threw their sabot, the wooden shoes. The workers only didn't have real shoes. The workers were French and Vietnamese, but all the way through the French factories, threw their wooden shoes collectively into the machines to go on a collective strike. This is how Macron's socialist faction was born. But they were opposed by the Republicans. And remember, the French Revolution killed 14,000 members of the French Republicans in order to win an election. The French Jacobins, aka the socialists, murdered people to win an election. That's how. That's Macron's party, but French have short memories and even less morals than the. Basically, since the French Revolution, France has fallen into immorality and decay and decadence. The Germans were ridiculing the French and their obsessions with North Africa, and the French did not like this. So the French and British blew up some German railways they've done before in 1908, as they'd done before, thinking this time it'll be no different. However, Germany and Turkey did get together. I think this was, and many feared that this alliance was doomed, and they were right. Bismarck and others, Hindenburg, and many leading Germans at the time said the Kaiser was fighting to, should have built better alliances long before going to war. Even, they knew the British and French were and should have done more to address the Americans, should have worked more with the Americans. But the Americans abandoned Germany in 1908, 1909, 1914, then turned against them, even though they did secure supplies. Well, technically they didn't abandon America. They didn't abandon it completely. They did send military supplies and a loan, but everyone knew Germany was defeated before they even started. Germany was bogged down in the trenches, losing millions of men. And this is the same situation we have now in Ukraine, where everyone knows Ukraine is bogged down. Everyone knows Russia's bogged down. Russia can't disengage because every time they try a truce, Ukraine will just attack something else. Now, this time, it's not railways, it's oil facilities and shipping. As you may or may not know, Russia's responded by its proxies in the Middle East, of course, to put strategic pressure on America. Now, initially, this was just to close the Strait of Hormuz. Unfortunately, when you grab a tiger by the tail, things spiral out of control very quickly. Iran saw a golden opportunity to engage in its usual practice of banditry, which goes all the way back to the collapse of the Persian Empire, where the once mighty Persian army was reduced to desert bandits attacking the Silk Road for small change, basically, becoming nomadic bandits. And it took a long time in the period between the collapse of the First Persian Empire with the defeat by Alexander to rebuild, the defeat of Xerxes, wasn't actually by Alexander. Alexander got the Persians to defeat themselves and handed the empire to him because they wanted a great alliance, but it turned out to be a facade. He disrespected his Persian wife, he disrespected the Persian people and culture, and abandoned them for his further conquests. Now, he was sick. It's believed that Alexander had contracted something akin to jungle fever uh, or something, anyway, when he reached Nepal. For some people, it could have been one of the many exotic diseases, or even poisons from. But anyway, he was dying. The Persians let him die, and the empire tore itself apart. Now, this is relevant because, remember, the Soviet Union, much like the breakup of Alexander's empire, was a various bunch of petty warlords who could never get along, who only got along because they had a mutual external enemy. And when they realised that it was better to trade with America than to go to war against America, this is when the Soviet Union broke up. And it was almost amicable. Ukraine pretty much clung to Russia, and every Ukrainian president has been in an abusive relationship with Russia. Okay? Where the president would put on a facade, a smile, a nod. But you've got to remember, the Russian Revolution came out of Ukraine. The Ukrainians warred against Russia by the millions. They were the largest foreign contingent in the German army. Although some would say Hungarians, that's impossible. Everyone knows it was not Hungarians. Well, everybody knows post-World War II, there were a lot of lies told. There are actually not that many Hungarians. There were a lot more Croats, and there were way more Ukrainians. But for some reason, Operation Paperclip came along, took the bulk of the Ukrainian army that had fought for the little mustache man, and relocated them across the world, predominantly Canada and parts of the United States. And some of them were, let's say, relocated to the Middle East because they were not ethnically Ukrainian. They were Zelensky's kin, let's so to speak. But as you know, tens of thousands, post-collapse of the Soviet Union, tens of thousands of Jews have moved to Eastern Europe. A lot of them predominantly are Eastern Europe, and this is where we get are the Jews in the Middle East Middle Eastern or ethnically descendant? There's again, if the Middle East wants to address colonialization, they have to look within first, I think. Just like India. India's in a state of hypocrisy. They're trying to be a colonial power without openly declaring themselves one. Ukraine, whether or not you want to believe that Zelensky is part of a greater project, that's up to you. I'm not going to put words into your mouth this time. I want you to decide, is Zelensky, because I have highlighted so many times where he said he wants to turn Ukraine into a Jewish state, and, well, it seems that people know, right? But right now we have France openly. Now, read between the lines. I'll say it to you again, very slowly, for the peanut gallery. France wants an open war. So the question has to be asked, and I know a lot of you will ask this, does that mean there's a covert war? That's between Trump and Mark Rutte, who seem to have an understanding that, and Mark Rutte has admitted that key European allies did betray the spirit of NATO. NATO has often asked above and beyond the NATO agreement for assistance, such as Libya and Syria, where the US has come in and to protect the French. Remember the NATO agreement, the French asked under the NATO agreement, which they hadn't even joined. By the way, when they invoked the NATO agreement, they weren't part of NATO until 1963, but they were trying to join NATO. But under this agreement, they wanted a commitment by America in You guessed it, Vietnam, which they called Indochina at the time, even though they referred to the people as Viet Kinh, which means Vietnamese people in Vietnamese. Ironic, right? Now, Viet Kinh are 89% of Vietnam. There's Cambodians and Thais as well, and some Chinese. Although it's increasingly the number of migrants is threatening the stability of Vietnam, because they now have over 1 million unemployed Chinese in Vietnam, which is the largest unemployed group in Vietnam. So we have the quiet part spoken out loud. Now, when we go to the map, and you can see it on the screen, it's been there for a little while. Now, as of April 10, the Russians have slowed even further than their previous rate of advance. Their previous rate of advance this year was around 11 square kilometres a day. The peak, that's their... So they're down from their peak in 2022. Now, in the last 10 days of this month, it has dropped to 5.5 square kilometres a day. In some areas, they only advance 70 metres. Like I said, they are only retaking trenches they previously dug that they lost in 2022. They're mostly retaking old territory that's now... And some Ukrainian trenches are actually Russian trenches. That's why they look funny, because they're facing the wrong way. They're actually Ukrainians are occupying previously dug Russian trenches. Right now, Russian special forces are bogged down with explosive ordnance clearing in Klostrovia. The Russians claim that Ukraine have left unexploded ordnance and other munitions all around the battlefield, and they keep dropping cluster munitions. We do not have footage, but according to the Ukrainians, Russia has launched over 500 drones and dozens of missiles in the last quarter, right? An average of 500 drones and dozens of missiles a week, and has intensified their daytime strikes. Now, they claim that they're targeting civilian infrastructure. Russia is arguing that the Ukrainian military has wired into and does not have a separate infrastructure, that it's a militarized state. Just like how Ukraine target, and then rightfully so, they point to Ukrainians' attacks on the oil and gas facilities and power plants in Kursk and Belgrade and many others, which are not connected to the military. The attack on Novograd, that's a port owned by... That port is owned by a consortium from the Caspian Sea and many countries. It's not owned by the Russian government, yet it was attacked. And Europe is furious because apparently some of the linked pension funds have lost a fortune because they didn't only attack oil, they attacked many civilian programs and projects that were on hold, but, they attacked a vehicle plant, which was formerly owned by BMW, which is in dispute, and if the sanctions are over and the dispute settled, was likely to go back to BMW. Now, what has BMW got? A wreck. Right? Yes, maybe Russia is making tanks there. But after the war, there is all likelihood that even under Russian law, according to BMW's Russian lawyers, that they'd get it back. All it takes is an easing of Russian sanctions and repayment of debts and settlements, which would be paid off over time, right? They'd settle. Now, March 26 saw the smallest gains of 23 square kilometres. Now, approximately 20% of Ukraine is under Russian control. And according to the Study for Institute of War, again, none of whom have produced anything of note since September 2023. Yeah, they're consistently just saying now the war's going to drag out. I don't know what's happened with the Trump deadline, but Russia has addressed this deadline apparently, and is now speaking with the Americans. Now we have a body swap and a prisoner swap being organised, and it's a truce for 32 hours for the Orthodox Easter. The Ukrainian military allegedly has forced Zelensky to accept this truce. And some want the truce extended after the end of Orthodox as hopefully getting Putin to say, look, you're not going to get much more land. What you're going to gain? What? You're going to gain one village a week for the next couple of months, and then America's going to go, well, if you don't stop it now, we're going to put a 50% tariff on you, all your friends. We've already put tariffs on China and Iran. We're going to sanction 100% your economy, right? Nothing but the bare essentials, right? You just get food and medicine, that's it. You can't sell anything to the West other than food and medicine, right? You can sell... right now, Russia is weighing up, and they're told straight up front. Now, this does remind me a little bit about the war on war. And there's been a few books on the war on war. Now, it was focused on as a skit in Red Dwarf, America's War on War. There was a book, I think it was called Artful. Was it Artful? No, I'm trying to think of the book. I couldn't find it, but I know I've read it. It was a book, an interesting book, where there's this ancient king. He has a great curse. He's undead. He's going around killing everyone who's involved in his downfall and celebrating his death. And eventually runs into his estranged daughter from a witch who was the witch who cursed him. And he starts to understand that the reason why he was cursed, and the many others who were cursed, and that was about war, right? War destroys business, it destroys lives, and warlords destroy wives. And he has a change of heart, and he helps her and her war on war to bring about an end to all the warlords. And when he's finished killing all the warlords, he realizes he apologizes to the woman he abandoned, apologizes to his daughter, who he never really got to know, and finally agrees that all he wants to do is put down his sword, and then the curse is lifted, and he's allowed to die. Remember, he's been undead for quite some time, fighting war after war, unable to die. Now, it's an allegory for how war does not die, right? The whole concept, there are concepts, the Greeks, I think they assigned names to concepts, and this is where you get are Greek gods allegories, or were they real people used as allegories? I think there's a bit of both, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what you have is Ares, the undying god, right? The god of war. War is undying. It's an undying thing, where even if we extinguish the war in Ukraine, we have the war in Iran, then China's proxy war against the West with Taiwan, North Korea's 1,000-year anger against the South. You may not know this, but it used to be known as the Three Kingdoms. Now, North Korea conquered two kingdoms, never was able to conquer the South. The South, in the 50s, engaged in a preemptive strike against North Korea, believing they were building up their military to attack the South. Well, North Korea always maintains they were only building up their posture because they're afraid of an American attack to in Truman's crusade against communism. And it is now widely believed the CIA coup was an ousting, pushed by Truman, opposed by the Republicans, and unfortunately, Nixon, who pretty much earned a lot of public respect with his, visit to Korea, unlike any other politician before in his bid for office. And again, many saw his war's involvement in Vietnam as betrayal, although he was always trying to end it. Unfortunately, there were those who always want war and will always push for war. That's why we have what's called the Uni Party. The Lindsey Grahams, the John McCains, the Dan Crenshaws. Now, I'm not accusing Marjorie Taylor Greene of being a Uni Party, but she certainly seems to feel that she's on the different side of the Uni Party, the party of constant criticism. So we have this complex web of deceit, and we'll get to that later. But right now, as you can see, there's almost no change to the front. Now, again, the Ukrainians are saying the Russians have made small gains in Seversk and Kostyakovia. The Russian Special Forces have allegedly shown images on Telegram, which allegedly come from inside Kostyakovia, showing what a ruin the place is and how the Ukrainians have extensive tunnels and dug into the ruins, and many bunkers. Many of these buildings that have collapsed in on themselves are now bunkers themselves. The bottom floors are bunkers protected by layers of concrete and rubble. Even some Russian commanders allegedly believe that this should be the line of demarcation, that they're not going to go further north than this. That some have openly asked in Russia, is this the end of the war? And they believe that closing this gap here is either a military push to cut off Kostyakovia, but they can't break through. It will take a big breakthrough. Remember, in World War II, the Russian breakthrough was 6,000... No, sorry. It started as an initial push by 6,500 T-10s and T-20s, and ended up being 10,500 T-56s by the time they got to Berlin. And most of those were made in America and shipped to Russia. There's no way Russia is going to get hundreds of factories ever, let alone in the next year, enough to build enough tanks and enough Kalashnikovs. Right? They're struggling to arm and keep their armaments up. They need drone help from multiple countries just to keep up their drone production. The Russian population just is not... they just do not have the excessive skill and labour required for a big war economy, like the US was able to pivot in World War II. And Europe was able to spread its labour out, and is also unable to keep up with... Here's the thing, Europe is unable to keep up with the Russians. They're relying on America. Now, Trump, in his methods, upset the Europeans over the Monroe Doctrine. For a long time, the Democrats have agreed with Europe for the sake of NATO. They will no longer pursue the Monroe Doctrine. Yet, they do everywhere else but Greenland. Okay, they helped Canada with its final stages. Canada, for a long time, had put its independence on hold after World War II. Even now, still maintain British institutions. But Canada doesn't want to be independent anymore. It wants to be a vassal of India and China. It wants to be part of a global vassal, it wants to be a global vassal state. So there's a huge ideological problem there, where the United States, wanting to support Greenland's independence, offered them a deal in which they'd buy Greenland, right, or back their independence, Either way, Denmark has to renounce ownership. Now, there was going to always be, even if the United States bought Greenland, there was still going to be the, is it the Inuit? Or they call themselves a different name in Greenland. I forget whom. But the native population of Greenland, who are actually of mixed European descent, most of them are mixed race. Some of them Native Americans brought by the Vikings north. So most of Greenland technically are Danish, but not that Danish. So a lot of them do want independence. A lot of them did want American statehood. Some wanted Canadian statehood, part of Nova Scotia or whatever. Or part of the Great White North, I mean by snow, not by colour of skin. They wanted to be part of that Canadian group. Or which a lot of Canadians want to be part of America. So there is a lot of complex issues which the media brought down to Trump is mean. And of course, all the people who are history's sore losers just immediately explode. And again, you haven't met a sore loser until you've met a Russian. And I'm telling you, right, this is why Russians don't get along with Russian women. Because just so much, and it's the same with Ukraine, just so much ego. And it's not the kind of ego we're used to in the West, where it's all about me, look at me, attention-seeking ego. No, it's about winning. Because, again, it's history's sore losers. Ukraine is acting out. Now, as you can see, Russia, of course, is demonstrating what sore losers they can be with the largest bombardment. Again, every time there's a truce, leading up to that truce, there's a massive bombardment. It's almost standard practice in war. But there's only a couple of places there's been advances on the front. And, of course, Ukraine, leading up to the truce, has engaged in a lot of drone attacks of Russia as well, most of which... Now, the battle near Kharkiv has finally been declassified by, of all places, Russia. Now, they are saying it's an illustration, but they are demonstrating the crushing defeat of Ukraine near Kharkiv. Now, this was actually... It says... Yeah. '26. This video image search. You make up the mind. Was this 2026 or 2022? There are similar eerie things, but I think some of the equipment does suggest that it was in January when the Master Matsar B came into production, and the first production models within days of this is mass production, not because it was tested as far back as 23, but the first new versions, I think the M3 version, this is the one with the biggest barrel, these are towed array, the first ones, whereas the new ones are on chassis because they're just too heavy for trucks. As you can see, they are huge guns. There's overlaid footage. This is actual footage of war. This is the Russian shelling of Kharkiv. Now, they never advanced after this into Kharkiv, which they could have. The Ukrainian army was pushed back. This was to push they thought with this battle, they would push back the Ukrainians and force them out of the entire region. As you can see, what Russia can do. These are massive artillery pieces. Look at the size of them. Each one is able to destroy the entire building within a few shots. They could decimate Ukraine if they wanted to. As you can see, they fire off a few shots, They hit bunkers. Now, they thought they would just destroy the Ukrainian army and then walk into Kharkiv. And they didn't. And then Kupiansk. And now they're bogged down. It's battery fire and counter battery fire. As you can see, look at the destruction they could reap. This is probably too long, but as you can see, day and night for a few days, they destroyed Kharkiv. They destroyed Kupiansk. They destroyed a number of Ukrainian positions over the course of weeks. Up to 60 degree elevation, negative 15. Standard range of a standard artillery shell, 30.4. The lighter high explosive could go 30 further, and the rocket assist 47. That range has been increased recently by the new artillery shells. So these are using the M2 ammunition, not the M3, sorry. And they are drone assisted. Yeah. And it's, yeah. 2.7. Yeah, version 2, that's the thought. Not the 3. The 3, the difference with the 3 is it does have a bigger radar system, and again, it has a longer range because it's using rocket-assisted artillery rather than standard, powder shells. We'll see over the coming months what happens, but I believe, and the Institute of War and many others will tell you the same thing, and I independently came up with this before I looked it all up. Neither side can win this war now. There is no winning this war. There is only ending this war. It's like Vietnam. There was no winning in Vietnam. The Vietnamese, they quietly celebrate their independence, but you know what their real celebration is? New Year. Right? They don't want to celebrate war. They don't want to remember their war. As a lot of countries don't remember their wars. Africa's had 6,000 years of warfare. Can you name any of them other than Rwanda? Even Rwanda doesn't talk about Rwanda. This is what they do. Most countries do. They ignore, bury, hide, cover up their wars, and then later deny they ever had wars, like India. India says, we never attacked anybody. Yeah, you invaded Malaysia. You invaded Tibet. You invaded the Himalayas. You occupied... remember, they got the British, though, to help India occupy all the way to Afghanistan. So, and of course, India infamously spent over 100 years being the backbone of the British Army. So, we never attacked anybody. No, you're a colonial power. You're a neo-colonial power, and you're worse. You're a parasite of a colonial power. The Indians loved the British Empire until there were no more wars. When there were no more wars, and the winding down of the British, World War II was the last hurrah. But they loved the British Empire. They wanted all there was, all their glory, all that money. But when the British were saying, look, the Empire's costing, we have to get rid of over 100 warships, it's just costing us too much money. For what? There are no pirates. Most of the world was safe. And there'd been a massive de-escalation. If India hadn't, if India wasn't so angry and to wanting to beat their chests and prove what men they are, probably there wouldn't have been a World War II, at least in Asia. There were many complex issues that led to war in Asia, not just India, China, the attempts to isolate Japan. That was Grandpa Chef who was responsible for that. Never underestimate war criminals. Their children will join the government to act out their revenge fantasies, like how the chefs want revenge on Russia. Why? Because Russia took away their merchant bank in 1917. Never underestimate how many world events today are acts of revenge by individuals who've spent time Victoria and Newland, working their way through government, Victoria and Newland, and many others, freemen in Canada, and look at all the Ukrainians across the world in government right now lobbying for war against Russia instead of being deported back to Ukraine. Now, Putin was the first to announce a truce on Ukraine. He laid out the terms. Now, they appear to be accepted by Zelensky. Now, rumour has it he was actually forced on him by his war cabinet, which is made up of SBU, the head of defence, the head of the army, the head of the Ukrainian Air Force, and his chief of staff. Now, why aren't the Minister of Defence there? Well, he's in financial trouble, remember? He's a scandalous figure now. So is the energy minister. And don't forget, 3 of Zelensky's pals are on the run from the law. Zelensky himself is not facing any criminal charges now. He's merely a witness. So history has been rewritten once again. However, as part of the Easter truce, Putin's envoy was allowed into the US for talks with Trump's officials, much at the anger of Europeans who want Trump to put a travel ban on all Russians. Yes, that's why Europe wouldn't help the United States in Iran, because they wouldn't put more sanctions on Russians. Remember, Europe says, no, NATO's not there for us to defend you or for us to help you. It solely exists for you to be at our beck and call and do our bidding and what we deem defense of us. Mark Rutte got the hard word, right? That NATO had expanded beyond its written terms and conditions of the original alliance long ago, when the US went into Kosovo on behalf of Europe, not in a defensive war, but to seize territory for the Europeans. Remember that, Bill Clinton and his offensive war, not defensive action. If it was defensive, they would have been defending Serbs against the Albanian terrorists. No, they didn't. They attacked the victims and took their land and gave it to the terrorists so that Europe could take a huge chunk of a Serbian base and call it a NATO base. And then persecute the Serbian government, threatening the livelihood of many Serbs if they didn't turn around and surrender their government to the European Court of Justice, which is the most corrupt court in the world outside of China. Probably I wouldn't say it's in the top 10, but it's definitely one of the most. If you take out all the Chinese systems and North Korea and all the authoritarian states, if you just look at the West, European Court of Justice is the most corrupt in the West. And worse, it's mostly ideological corruption, which means don't think you can go in there and buy justice. You have to be part of the club. And see, because Russia, it's a big club and Russia's not in it, they're always on the outside. Now, things would have been different if Bill Clinton had kept his word and had signed the agreement for Russia and Ukraine to join NATO. See, now, apparently it was Ukraine. Russia was going to be accepted, but they couldn't accept Russia without Belarus and Ukraine, and they couldn't accept either of them and still can't. And this is the quiet part out loud. Zelensky's former spokesperson has fled for her life, allegedly, to Russia, allegedly. Some say she's living in Spain. Eula Mendel was accused of corruption recently. Now, she's given multiple interviews over many issues. She was fired by Zelensky allegedly for covering up corruption. Some say that they had an affair. That is no proof. Okay. Everybody knows that Zelensky, he sniffs young boys' hair. Okay. So, Vladimir apparently is part of a long-term plan. And now, many Europeans were puzzled by his behaviour, and still. But he's like every past Ukrainian president. They've all done this. They gain your trust, right? They make solemn promises. They show understanding of the issues. They act accordingly until they get their way, and then they turn against you. And then they do the exact opposite. Ukraine. Boris Johnson swears that he went to Ukraine and said that he wanted peace, but if this was not possible, that the UK would back. Now, he wasn't speaking on behalf of the Tory government. He was speaking on a united front. Okay? Labour, Greens, Reform. Okay? All of them had signed off on Ukraine. Huge parliamentary committee. They asked Boris Johnson to deliver the message. Now they don't want anything to do with him, and they all want to blame it all on him. Boris said no, it was all on Zelensky. He was just the messenger, and he wanted to find out what Zelensky's intentions were, saying that we will not put any pressure on you. Now Zelensky says, no, they pressured us into war, and now we have to. Now we're in this to the end. So everybody is lying, as far as I'm concerned. Many initially attributed Zelensky's behaviour to the language barrier, misunderstandings. This was until they knew that Zelensky presented himself as only able to speak Russian, yet turned out he was fluent in Ukrainian. He claims to have learnt it in 6 months through watching television and language coaching. But all of a sudden he's fluent in English. Then we find out that Volodymyr Zelensky is an actor who answered a casting call to be president. And that as soon as the performance was over, obligations were forgotten, and just like the actor leaving the stage after the performance, he believes he has no further obligations. You remember Zelensky running for office. He criticised Ukraine's past presidents for doing exactly that. If you give us this 27 billion euros, China, we'll build you this glorious motor plant. It'll be huge, and we give you a gateway to Europe and you transnational railway. No worries, all the land you want. What's happened? Belt and Road, bogged down. Ukrainians, the Ukrainian motor plant, barely made lawnmower engines. Then suddenly started making drones. And it turned out the person who owned the company was a cigarette smuggler. And when the war broke out, he went from cigarette smuggling to smuggling bombs into Russia. So the Ukrainian government's up to here in organised crime. People just don't want to know it. But they're openly now hesitant to criticise Zelensky, right? Because they're accused of being a pro-Russian settlement. They've created their own ideological barrier to ending this war. Any move to end this war is pro-Ukraine, is pro-Russian. And the left have, and this is, they create the paradox, right? Any attempt at the socialists demand peace, but any attempt at peace is immediately, you're pro-Russian, right? That's what they're doing with Hungary. It's the paradox. Nothing, they say, is honest, open, or truthful, or without conditions. But when you say open war with Russia, and you can look it up across multiple platforms, General Fabian, what a shock, as if that isn't wearing your politics on your sleeve. Look up Fabian Society, you'll see for yourself. And yes, the Fabians often call themselves Fabian. Now, Fabian dates all the way back to a Roman general who hunted Celts for sport. Why anyone would want to be a member of such a society? Well, since then it's a military fraternity of corruption that led to World War I and World War II, where they took part. The society, military officers from France and Britain, took part in the murder of the Austrian-Hungarian emperor to bring about the revolution for the Jacobins in Serbia. Break up the Austrian-Hungarian Empire so the British could say, one less competitor. Everything comes down to money. And what's France wanting? To grow their GDP to grow their GDP. They're pushing spending to grow their GDP to increase even further military spending, to buy explosive drones from you-know-who, guide bombs from, of course, explosive drones and guide bombs. Scalp cruise missiles are the only French thing on this page. There's no talk of the Rafale. There's no talk of building their air force or navy, or even the number of artillery. No, they want a pure. Well, why they want glide bombs without aircraft? Well, they're going to be using their proxies, aren't they? They're not going to be the open war. It's going to be predominantly proxies. It's going to be German troops in Ukraine backed by France. They're planning this war with England as well. So, yeah. And that's again why they're putting strategic pressure on America to forget about the Middle East, abandon Iran, let them live and live, leave them alone. They can have the Strait of Hormuz. We'll rather pay them the $2 million a day per ship than defend our interests in the Middle East. No, let Qatar and Oman and UAE deal with the problem, which they can't, which is why they turned to America, because the Europeans wouldn't help them, right, with the Yemen terrorists, with the militias in Iraq, with the Hezbollah. No. It's Israel's the problem, says Keir Starmer. Israel's the problem, not all these other countries, all these terrorists attacking Israel. Because if you really believe Israel's evil, then leave them alone, let them do evil, and then attack them. No, instead they accuse them of evil, attack them, and then when Israel defends itself, you turn around and say, oh, they attacked us. No, that doesn't work like that. Sophistry does not bode well in my book. Okay? France's sophistry right here. We have to. Why? Because there's going to be an imminent Russian attack. Well, prove it. The only thing I've seen, again, the drones in Poland, Ukrainian. The drones off the Estonian coast, they were spies. They were, okay, no one's really connected to Russia, but they were spy drones. And how many countries launch spy drones around the world now? Heck, even Zimbabwe is spying on its neighbours and patrolling its borders with drones now. Again, what's keeping the Ukrainian economy afloat? War. And the French want to grow their economy. How? Well, if you can't grow your economy before a war, how do you grow it after? You have to destroy someone else's economy. Do you finally get it? This is why I see war as a men's rights issue. Because who are the victims of war? Don't ask Hillary Clinton. Because she'll say it's the women. The women suffer the most. Yeah. So Ukraine is accused of plotting a maritime attack on Russian shipping in open waters in the Baltic Sea. Now, a group of 50 servicemen from the Marines are in Norway, and they have been seen and been photographed, and they have been publicised and shown off as our dear comrades in a recruitment video saying how they look forward to go to war with Russia. Of course, the video did its circulation and was taken down off X. But this is what I've been told, that Ukraine is our ally, Ukraine is our friend, Ukraine is our comrade in the struggle against Russia. So they did recruitment videos and everything. Apparently, Norwegian Navy was even showing off their drones that they had purchased from Ukraine. But all the crates were in English. So who's really making all these drones? Who's really behind all this? Now, if anybody's seen this video on X before it was taken down, does anybody have that video? I'd love to see that video. Oh, wait, that's a different thumbnail. Yeah, I left the tab open, sorry. Alright, so there's been meltdown over Russia's actions recently. France has lodged protests. Reuters had an interesting article that they talking about the Easter truce, and they're showing the death and destruction without context in Ukraine, where there's burnt out buildings, burnt out cars, not many people in the streets in the cities. Apparently, people lining up in Khersonovia for soup kitchens. But there's a small volunteer army apparently that's feeding the troops now. That's winding down. So does that mean they're coming to an end of their proxy war? Or is this just part of the changing of the guard? Are they just trying to elicit sympathy? You never know with Ukraine. I think everything, even when they're winning, they always present themselves as losing. But as soon as they need to recruit new soldiers, they start talking about winning again. So when they want money, they talk about losing. When they talk about, there's an imminent attack. Really? Look at this. There was an imminent attack. There'd be red from here all the way round to here. There'd be Russian ships off the coast bombarding daily. There'd be drone every day. They would focus on detonate, advance, blow up, advance. The Russian army is not engaged in an occupational war. It's not running a conventional war. It's doing everything it can to disable the military forces without escalation. But every time Ukraine escalates, Russia escalates. And it's got to the point where Putin has to decide how much of this... now, again, every news article in Russia is pointing to a buffer zone not expanding their holdings. Which is weird, but yeah. They want a buffer zone. They've offered to trade, giving up this land for this land, and nothing. And J.D. Vance has described it as haggling. Sooner or later, it's going to collapse. The House of Cards, they can't keep holding it in. They cannot keep lying to the public. They cannot keep lying to themselves. Sooner or later, we'll have more people speak out against the war. We've seen this in the past. Okay. even World War II, people spoke out and said, this is an atrocity, we're bombing cities, but Roosevelt was able to successfully silence people. Since 1945, even Truman said, Roosevelt should not go down in history books as anything other than a fascist. But since World War II, I think the Democrats have tried to overcorrect for all of Roosevelt's atrocities. And some of their own. Isn't that right, Al Gore? Trying to make up for the sins of your father. And Bill Clinton and his friends, his hillbilly friends. Trying to, again, cover up all their success. Most of them have successfully covered out their past with, bootlegging. My grandfather was an honest businessman. All he had was a warehouse. He was an honest businessman. Yeah, warehouse in the 1930s. Yeah, that's what that's code for. No one owns a warehouse and becomes one of the richest families in the world. No, not from one warehouse. Thank you very much. Come from warehousing Canadian liquor in the 1930s, and probably opioids in the 1940s. Before they were illegal. And then sold them to the army. Oh no, it's just part of the legal trade. Yeah. Everyone's got skeletons. No one should be throwing stones. The whole world's a glass house with broken windows. And the only way we're going to start solving rights issues, start respecting rights again, start de-escalating wars, there are over 17 border conflicts going on around the world right now. Some of them in China. We've seen the violence in India and China. We've seen the violence against Russians by Chinese. Things are not cozy or kosher anymore between Russia and the Jewish Oblast and China and the Jewish Oblast and the railway, Trans-Siberian Railway, the Chinese high-speed rail project that's collapsed. So BRICS, I think, is on its knees. Whether or not it collapses is probably up to Russia. Russia's the thing that holds it together. China certainly sees Xi's walking around with his eyes wide shut. Doesn't seem to see the just thinks he can wave a magic wand and just make people stop caring about because Chinese were happy once upon a time to trade success for political power. The communists have all the political power. You give us success, right? Allow us to be successful. I think that's one of the reasons why so many betrayed the emperor in the first place. Is everybody thought he was the problem, and it wasn't. It was not just the system. It was. And as we're seeing, as soon as the system took over, it was even more corrupt than it was. Yeah, it was the bureaucrats who were corrupt and causing all the problems in China. And now everyone knows, well, what do? They can't get rid of this parasite. And that's like in Ukraine. I think Zelensky could die tomorrow and this war will... Someone else will stand up and start speaking the same speeches and the same rhetoric. I think it's the grand system of Ukraine that was put in place in the 1930s by the gangsters who murdered millions to get their way into power. And now that they have power, they want to flaunt they have power. And they've enriched themselves. Now, whether or not you agree with America being the world police or not, but I think, we abandoned Cuba for less. You know that, right? So why can't we abandon Venezuela for less than what Zelensky's done? We abandoned Serbia, for Christ's sake. And we abandoned Russia in 96. We abandoned Ukraine in 91. Yeah, there was the Budapest Memorandum that was forced by Eastern Europeans. And again, the security guarantees were on condition that they wouldn't start a war, which they did. And then we had the Minsk Accords, which they never implemented. The list goes on. And I think I've said enough. I think hopefully you'll understand my point primarily, why these issues are so complex and can't be discussed in a 15-minute soundbite. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. Appreciate each and every one of you. I know most people don't want deep dives. I'm going to continue. Bye for now.